A political controversy has erupted in Alberta. Late yesterday, the provincial government tabled a bill that would see the position of the election commissioner eliminated. That commissioner is currently investigating the United Conservative Party leadership race, which saw Jason Kenney become leader and eventually premier. The blowback has been so intense that it boiled over into this today in the legislature.
We will continue to ensure that the Chief Electoral Officer remains an independent officer of this legislature.
The House Leader is misleading the House, but the Premier is saying that Albertans are subject to one set of rules, but when it comes to himself, it's a whole new world and he can rewrite them as any cover-up demands.
The opposition knows full well that she can't make a statement like the government House Leader is misleading the House. She can apologize and withdraw.
And so I will not apologize until we have fully canvassed the destructive nature of this bill in a historic way to the people of this province and to the members of this House.
If she chooses not to follow them, she won't be allowed to be in the House.
I have never seen a threat to this House like Bill 22, not in the province's history. And so I cannot apologize.
The Speaker may name a member and require them to be removed from the Assembly, at which time, Rachel Notley, you are no longer permitted to be in the Assembly for the rest of the day.
Moments after Rachel Notley was kicked out of the legislature, she spoke to us. Here's my conversation with the leader of the Alberta NDP. Hi, Ms. Notley. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate your time this evening.
Good to see you, or good to talk to you.
So I was mentioning to you right before the start of this interview that as I walked in here, I was seeing tweets saying that you had just been kicked out of the legislature. From your perspective, what just happened?
Well, I was doing what one normally does in question period, and I was asking the government to account for Bill 22, which we perceive to be an unprecedented and historic attack on the democratic institutions of this province, in particular because it amounts to the firing of an officer of the legislature, the elections commissioner, who is in the middle of an investigation into corruption by UCP operatives. It's something that I've never seen or heard of in the history of Alberta or frankly anywhere in Canada, and it threatens our democracy. In the course of my questions, the House Leader got up at one point and suggested that it was not true that the legislation fired the Elections Commissioner. But in fact, it is very true that at the very least it demotes the Elections Commissioner and that he no longer has certainty or tenure of contract that he used to have. It is a profound interference with the administration of justice. And so I told the House Leader that he was misleading the legislature on the basis of what is actually in front of all of us in the way of the legislation. This is so important. We need to discuss the facts. We cannot continue to play games like this. They don't get to recreate their own reality when they start attacking our democracy here in Alberta.
It's my understanding that you're not allowed basically to say that someone misled the House and that the Speaker gave you the opportunity to apologize. Why did you not avail yourself of that opportunity?
Because, you know, as much as the traditions of the House suggest that we have to play these games around whether someone is or is not lying, the much more important traditions of the House are that executives of the House and members and independent officers of the House cannot be fired by the executive of this government when they become subject to investigation by the independent officers. This goes to the very heart of Canada's Constitution and the separation between the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature. And this is a profound existential threat to the integrity of our democratic system here in the province. And so subjective rulings about what is or is not out of bounds when we're dealing with something that is so much more important is not something that we're going to play around with.
Okay, let me ask you about Bill 21, because as you're characterizing it, and I understand that to be the dispute within the House or within the legislature this afternoon, that the commissioner was fired. The government is defending its decision by saying that this is about saving money, that it's trying to be fiscally responsible here. It's folded the office into I'll get your response in a second. I just want to outline what they're saying. It's folded the chief electoral officer's office into this office, and the move is supposed to save about $200,000 a year. It's also my understanding that the commissioner could be rehired by the chief electoral officer. So is it really just them blatantly firing this person?
It is. Now, first of all, in terms of that ridiculous line that they've come up with, this is a government that has created a $120 million campaign slush fund that they are hiding from Albertans and won't tell anybody what they are using it for. Who gave a $1 million contract untendered to a relative's law firm to do part of this un-Albertan activities panel. And somehow they think they need to coincidentally save $200,000 a year by fundamentally restructuring and constructively dismissing the elections commissioner when he's in the middle of an investigation into the UCP leadership race. I mean, he's already rendered over $200,000 in fines. There's been 16 people that have been covered by it. The investigation is not over. This is a clear abuse of power. And the talking points of the UCP are ridiculous. And they are insulting the intelligence of all Albertans.
Let me ask you about the way that you plan to fight this bill. You've written a letter to the Lieutenant Governor asking her not to sign it. We've spoken to a constitutional expert, Philippe Lagacé, who says this isn't really the way it works. That's not what the Crown is there for. That's the job of the courts. Your response?
Well, we are also absolutely getting advice on additional steps that we may be able to take to the courts. But we know that there was the recent precedent in the UK where the courts intervened with Boris Johnson's request to the Crown for prorogation. And at that time, the court said that the executive does not have the unfettered ability to advise the Crown if they are advising in a way that would result in something that is illegal or interferes with the ability of Parliament to do its work, that frustrates the role of Parliament.
But are you asking the Lieutenant, are you asking her to make that determination? Is she supposed to say this amounts to political interference?
We are.
And do you think that that is the role of the Lieutenant Governor?
Now, I'm not... It's very rare and very unique. It's been done once before in Alberta back in the 30s, and I believe one other time in Canada. I'm not suggesting it's absolutely likely, but then again, something like this, a gross abuse of power like this, has not ever happened in Canada before either. So we're going to, as I've said before, I'm committed. We're going to do every single solitary thing that we can to stop this bill. This is one of our efforts, and we'll be looking at others as well.
Are you going to be taking this to court?
As I say, we're consulting with lawyers right now. It takes a little bit more than 24 hours to talk to lawyers and get their opinions, but we absolutely will be meeting with lawyers and looking at the best way to get this matter before the courts, and if the government doesn't back down.
Okay, my apologies. And have you received a response from the Lieutenant Governor?
No, I have not yet. To be fair, we only sent the letter earlier today. I've offered to meet with her and provide her with more information. We asked in the most respectful way possible, and we look forward to hearing from her, and we'll see what happens.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Ms. Notley. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
The election commissioner at the center of this controversy released a statement this afternoon. Lauren Gibson writes, "I was surprised and disappointed with the news of this move, which came to my attention by way of media reports yesterday at 3 p.m. My disappointment is not related to my personal role as commissioner now or in the future. I am concerned about the potential negative impacts on the independence of election administration and the real and perceived integrity of the election process." We also did ask to speak with Premier Jason Kenney or the minister responsible for this file. No one was available.
This is a government that has created a $120 million campaign slush fund that they are hiding from Albertans and won't tell anybody what they are using it for. And somehow they think they need to coincidentally save $200,000 a year by fundamentally restructuring and constructively dismissing the elections commissioner when he's in the middle of an investigation into the UCP leadership race. I mean, he's already rendered over $200,000 in fines. There's been 16 people that have been covered by it. The investigation is not over. This is a clear abuse of power. And the talking points of the UCP are ridiculous.
I spoke with Alberta's opposition leader, Rachel Notley, about an hour ago, just after she was kicked out of the legislature for accusing the UCP government of lying about Bill 22 or misleading the House about Bill 22. It's an omnibus bill that would eliminate the position of the province's election commissioner, Lorne Gibson. Gibson is currently investigating the 2017 UCP leadership race. Jason Kenney's government denies the restructuring had anything to do with those investigations and instead is about fiscal responsibility. So what are the implications of this for the government and the Premier? Time for the Power Panel. In Calgary, Jason Markisoff joins us. He's of Maclean's. Political commentator and columnist Tiffany Gooch is with us from Toronto. And here with me, Earnscliffe Strategy Group's Jeff Norquay and political commentator and former NDP MP Françoise Boivin. Hi, everybody. Great to see you. Jason, I'm going to start with you because you're in the thick of it there in Alberta. Explain to me a little bit about the heat the government is taking and then also your take on the NDP's response.
It's pretty thick right now, I gotta say. This is pretty remarkable. Jason Kenney is incredibly popular in this province, and we've been asking what does he think he can get away with, what sort of things does he think he can do, and this shocked a lot of us, I think. Lorne Gibson, the election commissioner, was put in by Notley's government a couple years ago. The PCs and the Conservatives never liked him. He was elections Alberta CEO a decade ago, and they actually fired him, the Tories did. So there was not good blood there, especially not when he became quite an aggressive dogged watchdog. He's laid tens of thousands of dollars in fines for over contributions, and then and then $200,000 for the in a very questionable UCP leadership financing scheme, which didn't involve Jason Kenney himself, but involved his stalking horse candidate, somebody that he put up to help undercut his rival. So, surprise, surprise, Jason Kenney doesn't like to do that and thinks he's popular enough that he can get away with slapping this guy down through some basic constructive dismissal.
And what about the NDP? Let me just quickly follow up with you. I mean, they're getting some heat for the way in which they're responding insofar as taking this to the Lieutenant Governor and the idea of the Crown somehow being able to intervene here.
Because Jason Kenney's been so reformist and so sweeping in the way he's been changing Alberta's finances, governance, launching war rooms, and a few little ethics brouhahas, the NDP's been hitting the panic button a lot. Well, this is a case when the case comes for a really big one, they're going ballistic with really unusual, strange things. Notley decidedly getting thrown out of the legislature, and this lieutenant governor thing is bizarre, weird, not the way democracy works. I'm just waiting for the next provocation and for Notley and her aides to be chained themselves to the doors of the legislature, not let anybody in.
Or maybe to the doors of the elections commissioner's office. Tiffany, what do you think?
So it sounds very, very familiar to a lot of what took place in Ontario over the last year or so. And so I think the entire narrative of cuts and reducing red tape and all of what sort of come with these bills, I think is, again, a regurgitation of what we saw in Ontario. And I think, though, in Ontario it would have been the the environment and Francophone commissioners. And here I see a real erosion of public trust when there's a question as to what's taking place with an electoral apparatus and government. And so for there to be open investigations right now on UCP party members, for the savings to essentially on an annual basis equate to what's been levied against those members to be factored in here, I think there's absolutely a political story here, and one that we can definitely imagine as this bill moves through the House, the opposition leader will continue to raise the alarm over, but rightly so. Really needing to ensure that people are paying attention to what's taking place and to what those changes look like. I would say that the electoral commissioner and I think how the apparatus works itself is probably a little bit confusing for people, and the messaging that's coming out saying that they may be able to hire someone else or even rehire the same commissioner, and that all of the investigations will continue are all going to be sort of confusing messages for people to hear. But I think folks really do want to see a separation between how their elections are run and investigated if there are issues, and how their government is running. And so I think this is likely to be a fight to the end.
Yeah, just to explain for our viewers, my understanding is that what the government is proposing here is that the office of the Elections Commissioner will be folded into the Chief Electoral Officer's office, thereby eliminating, the government says, or saving the government about $200,000 a year. And I believe that contract was to end in 2023, so they've estimated the total is about $1 million. Jeff, they're saying this is about fiscal responsibility. They're denying the claims that the opposition are making that this smells bad. What do you think?
Well, look, the timing is bad. It looks awful. It's going to be a black eye to the government. That being said, there's an awful lot of offended virgins running around here, and they're all hanging out in a brothel, as far as I can see.
I'm trying to follow the metaphor. I'm not
well,
sure
okay.
if I can.
I'm not sure I like the metaphor.
Mr. Gibson is a political appointee. He previously was in the position of Chief Electoral Officer and was fired by a previous Conservative government.
He had proposed a myriad of amendments to the way elections are run in Alberta, and they didn't like it.
So, taking this all on board, Ms. Notley, when she was Premier, hired him and brought him back into this new position, which handles the enforcement of electoral rules. So he's essentially a political appointment. So, while the time is awful.
But maybe wait until the investigation is concluded. I take your point, but I mean...
but the investigation may, to use the legal term, continue. And I'm sure it will. But, nobody...
There are a lot of political appointees, though. Does that mean, in many levels of government, does that necessarily mean their credibility is compromised?
Sure. No contest here. The timing stinks. It's awful. But, there's a lot of backstory here.
Right. Françoise?
Not much more to add. I mean, it is totally political in a lot of aspects. If you like Jason Kenney and his government, I'm sure you think all this is posturing by the opposition. If you don't like him, then you say to Rachel Notley and her gang, please continue. At least do it in a smart way, though, because if she keeps being pushed aside from the assembly, the National Assembly over there, she might make a few headlines here and there, but in the long run, I'm not sure it's going to do much for the cause. I think with all that posturing one side and the other, we lose the reality inside and it's often the problem in politics. They make it so political that nobody is paying attention no more. There's some serious questions. I was like Tiffany on that one. At first, when I read the story, I thought automatically of the Commissioner for French Francophonie in Ontario. And I figure, okay, it still exists. Like Jeff says, it still can go with the Chief Electoral Officer, although I don't think he will have as much time as a dedicated person to do so. Timing stinks. We all agree with that. In the long run, what will it do to the government in place? I don't think that much.
What we almost certainly lose here with this is the doggedness. I mean, if you've been around long enough, you know that from Auditor General to Auditor General, Privacy Commissioner, there are different levels of aggressiveness. Gibson was dogged in a way that clearly rankled the United Conservatives. So Kenney wants to remove that from it. I mean, yes, they say that these investigations will continue, but they will be under new leadership. They say they can hire Gibson, but the Chief Electoral Officer's own contract is up for renewal next year, and Kenney's just sent a pretty solid signal that that he's watching how people operate, and he's ready to fold offices as he likes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, but I believe that the Chief Electoral Officer hasn't yet committed to either for sure continue, like the investigation is open for now, but hasn't committed necessarily to keep that investigation ongoing, and hasn't decided, at least formally, whether or not he will rehire Mr. Gibson. Is that
No,
correct?
and yeah, that's right. And they say that investigations could go on, and they might will, but they might not, be as assertive with fines. He was unusually assertive with fining people. Lauren Gibson, he was doing great for making money. Oh, and as far as the money goes, let's keep in mind this election commissioner budget amounts to 2.5 days worth of the energy war room against misinformation's budget. So I mean, if Kenny's really doing this in the name of fiscal conservatism.
The lieutenant governor will save the day.
Yeah, we'll see about that. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.